euthanasia, abortion, nearly every lifestyle imaginable. Anything goes, right? What happened to right or wrong? This is Encounter. It's fashionable now to consider personal experience as the only guideline for what's right or wrong. With all the world's knowledge at our fingertips, it's not possible to judge what is right or wrong. If there is no morality considered absolute, then moral judgments are only opinions capable of being proved either true or false. These views were once held by a few intellectuals, sophisticates, and academics. Today, these ideas pervade our society and shape the way we look at right and wrong. Is it true there are no constant, unchanging principles that guide and direct the way we live? Today, Dr. Zamora addresses these questions in What Happened to Right or Wrong? Welcome to Encounter.
Taking the risk of sounding trite, let me say that we are in the midst of a moral crisis. And then let me add, and we don't know why. The great traditional foundations of religious belief and humanitarian principles that gave us the basis for making moral decisions have been kicked out from under us. We are left with very little to make the urgent moral decisions that we have to make, not only as a nation, but especially as individuals. Rarely do you find Americans agreeing on who is moral or who is immoral. We are adrift without answers. So we have to ask, what happened to us? It wasn't like this in the past. The ground rules were sharper and the answers clearer. Now an uncertainty pervades all through our society and has even invaded religious institutions, and specifically the Christian church. Clergymen and their parishioners speak with conflicting voices from sex mores to business ethics. And one thing that most thoughtful people agree on is that we have lost our trusted anchor, which had given us security, and so we're lost at sea.
Okay, you said that it wasn't like this in the past. Well, what caused it?
Well, it depends on who you ask, of course. There are a number of causes that are mentioned. For instance, the social conditions are blamed, urban poverty, dehumanization of organization, the several wars that we've experienced. And it is probably true that these things have contributed to the state of things, but these things have existed before. There was poverty when I was growing up. I was a teenager when the war in Europe ended. The moral standards, however, were there. People were morally aware. There was still that moral responsibility. Now, these things may have had something to do with it, but I don't think that they're the basic cause. I think that without the ideas that had been fermenting in Western culture for decades, I don't think that such a crisis in morals would have occurred. What precipitated this behavior and this kind of thinking about right and wrong, I think, has to do with more. I think this kind of thinking does not come out of nowhere. It has its history like most things do. Now remember that for centuries the church was the teacher of morality. There was a belief that there were absolute principles of morality. There was not a lot of doubt about what was right and wrong. However, this didn't mean that people lived moral lives. The France of Louis XIV would have disproved any claim that these people were exceptionally moral. However, there was no doubt that people knew what right and wrong was. Like people in all ages, well, it's much easier to know than to do. So with the coming of rationalism, questions were raised and the challenge to moral absolutes was made. A long list of these thinkers, philosophers, began to reason and speculate about ethics and morality, and so various theories were proposed. It took time for them to take root, nevertheless they did. And then the contributions of psychology and anthropology and sociology to the discussions of ethics, well, they brought a greater skepticism toward moral absolutes. And because moral codes varied from time to time and from place to place, well, they were led to conclude that morality was merely a matter of opinion. Values, they said, were entirely subjective. There is nothing either good or bad, they said, but thinking makes it so. One man's opinion is as good as another. And if you differed with this view, its supporters would reply, and who are you to say? That's only what you think. You can't prove moral principles, and there are no moral truths. Morality has no rational basis. So they came to be known as moral skeptics. What had happened was the creation of moral skepticism. And the widespread and familiar form of moral skepticism is what is called ethical relativism.
So, if you're a moral skeptic, you would say that no one can say what is right. And as far as standards go, well, your standards, you can't force them on me. So in the same vein, can you define ethical relativism?
Okay, ethical relativism says that there is no correct moral code which applies to all times and to all peoples. Each different group of people has its own morality relative to its wants and values. So it is the culture of that group that determines to a great extent what their morals will be. And you can expect an African to have the same morals as the Japanese or Chinese or European. What is right for them may be wrong for others. So just because you think that couples should not live together until they're married doesn't make it wrong. Maybe to you it's wrong, but not to me. Recreational sex may be wrong to you, but it may not be wrong to me. Everything is relative. This is the standard that is applied to all moral behavior. And so this is what we call relativism. It's relative to your culture. It's relative to your group. And this was the basis of the moral revolution that took place in the 60s. They kept saying, well, love was the only absolute and everything else was relative. Well, their thinking about love wasn't what real love is. I believe that love is an absolute, but it's got to be the real one. Now, this is a simplistic way of putting it, but consequentially, that is, practically, this was the results. When there are no standards of behavior, when you're told that right or wrong is what you make it, what can you expect from people's behavior? When you teach this to young people, what can you expect in their behavior? Look at the results of such thinking. Today, nobody reacts to hearing of people living together or having children out of wedlock or chaotic behavior. They are even speaking about child pornography as if there was nothing wrong with it. After all, sexual mores are relative. So relative morality is like building a house on the sand. It has no foundation when the storms come. When one needs direction for an urgent moral decision, the result by and large will be wrong because there's nothing with which to decide.
Well, isn't this the kind of autonomy, self-sufficiency humans have been seeking? If you don't have any standards or absolutes to bother you, not only can you do as you please, but there's no repercussions for your actions.
it always, it's also, it always has been that way. And it also makes a person self-centered. You begin making moral decisions on the basis of self-interest. You begin to judge moral action as right if it is in the interest of yourself. You become the measure of all things. And this is what's been going on in our society. This explains the behavior we hear about every day. And the question we have to ask is, what has it done for humankind? Has it made life better for us? Are we better people for it? I think the answer is clear.
Okay, the next question is, how has this affected our society? This devaluation of values has got to have affected more than just behavior. It has to have affected the way people look at life.
I think that is where the most serious results of this relative morality is. Any society that expects its children to have integrity and be persons that are honorable and trustworthy must have moral heroes. They must have what Samuel Miller, who was dean of Harvard's Divinity School, called images of excellence. The society will degrade and decay without these images of excellence. And now today, young people know what a rich man is, a scientist, an actor, but they don't have any image or moral excellence. At least they don't have a view of what an image of moral excellence really is. And this is because morality is not high on the list of qualifications for someone to be excellent. When a society does not care whether their president is a liar or faithless or lecherous, that society has lost its moral sense. When morality is relative, then character is not important. When we say that it is not important what a leader does in his private life, well, we are marooned in a moral vacuum. All we have to do is look back in history, and we shall see these images of excellence that saved societies from the worst evils. Who do we look to for this excellence today? To me, the only one that stands out is Mother Teresa. But there are others that the news media won't be looking to find them. So in this moral vacuum, where does society go to find its moral heroes? Well, it venerates actresses who have acquired a string of lovers and divorced 5 times, athletes that brawl in nightclubs and spit on umpires, and who are indicted for rape, drug possession, drunk driving, and assault. They make quote-unquote excellent news copy. That's who the media wants to write about. And why is that? Because that's what people want to read. They reported that during this trial of Marv Albert, 200 reporters were assigned to cover it. So we have replaced the hero with a celebrity. And who are they? They're just waxworks carved out by public relations men who are paid to do so. Dr. David R. Mace, once executive director of the American Association of Marriage Counselors, said, "It is the people who can act, entertain, who become the rallying point of the people's need for heroes. They are essentially irresponsible people." So imagine making heroes of irresponsible people. This is the kind of mentality that relative morality creates in a society.
Okay, I can see how an idea like no moral absolutes can be translated into moral indifference. And if you are, confronted by this idea in college and it's accepted and you go on to view a media that's full of it, it's got to affect you very deeply.
Well, it's important for people to realize this, and to realize that this kind of influence is very subtle. The influence covertly, secretively enters the mind. Now, I want you to notice how you think of things now. Is it easy to excuse an immoral act by making it a sickness? Are you more sympathetic about premarital sex or excuse extramarital sex because someone was abused? What about stealing or lying? What do you think of those things now? See how this mentality can affect you even without thinking. The question is how a Christian lives in this permissive atmosphere. It is not easy if you're going to be serious about living as a Christian. If a Christian is going to try to make it as a Christian, he or she must think through what they really believe, what they really do believe, and then begin to make judgments about what is right and wrong in the context of those beliefs. They must be diligent to keep their mind on the principles of Christ and judge the moral validity of everything by those principles. Otherwise, they are in peril of falling hard. Now, you mentioned before about autonomy and self-sufficiency. You may remember that. Man's quest has been to free himself from any demands made on him. And you are right when you say that in moral relativity there is a human design to get rid of God. The object of today's society is to make God irrelevant or banish him altogether. You can't have him around and try to do as you please. So we hear about men being capable of charting his own destiny. We hear about him that he has grown up. He doesn't need a God anymore. But we know that this is what he needs more than in anything else. Man's refusal to open himself up to God has left him without till or anchor. He doesn't know where he is going, and he has nothing to steer with. And he has no anchor to ground him in uncertain times to something that is secure. And as long as he refuses to acknowledge God as Lord and trust him with his life, he will sail into alien shores and find the hostility of life ready to sink him. Oh, he may be able to avert the inevitable for a while, but finally it will do its dastardly work. So he wants to decide about abortion. So he says it's not a moral issue. He says that all moral issues aren't a matter of morality. They are a matter of individual freedom. So man ought to be free to abort, should have the freedom to die, the freedom to be deviant, the freedom to be promiscuous. But you see, history has proven that you really can't live like this. It would seem to me that we would wake up to the reality that history gives us a very good lesson. Every civilization has crashed because of this type of license. And we've learned that no culture can survive for long without discipline. There is nothing as effective as faith in God to be disciplined, to be a disciplined person. Because it gives a person the best of motives for being disciplined. So those who say there are no absolutes are rather silly, because to say there are no absolutes is an absolute. Love is an absolute. Kindness is an absolute. Service to our fellow men is an absolute. Can you discard any of these and be a whole person? Asks those who have tried it. Now here are some absolutes. Thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not bear false witness. These are what make a viable society. Try to live without them. Disregard them. and see what happens to society. You see, there is no way that mankind can live in peace without a moral foundation that does not place these absolutes as a cornerstone. That society will fail to exist. This is the righteousness that God seeks from every nation. This is the righteousness that the Bible says exalts a nation. America, well, it became great because it endeavored to live by the Ten Commandments. And there are those within it who want to separate her from that morality and the God who created it. And we must do our part to find her way back home.
In a moment, Dr. Zamora will return with his closing thoughts. Today's study, What Happened to Right or Wrong, is the third in the four-part series, The Shaping of American Society. The series takes a look at the four ideas that have shaped American thinking and lifestyles. Much of the ills we face as a nation can be traced to these ideas, which conditioned a generation towards irresponsibility, indifference to morality, and insensitivity to human life. Next week, Dr. Zamora continues this series with The Banishment of God. Don't miss this insightful study. Here again is Dr. Zamora.
It is so important to realize that morality is not about behavior. It is about life, total life. Scholarship today who spend their time studying ethics tell us that ethics is about life, not about how you act. Ethics and morality is not how you behave in the various aspects of life. It is about your humanity. And maybe I can illustrate what I mean by referring to Jesus. Now, to Jesus, the law of God was not something which stood outside of man. In other words, he did not treat it as something which was objective, like something in a piece of paper or hanging on a wall. He saw the law of God as something which was essential and intrinsic to that which was human. It was involved, very closely connected. To Jesus, the lustful look was wrong, not because there was a law that said it was wrong. The lustful look was wrong because it was the result of an attitude that evaluated human beings as something to be used for one's gratification. Stealing was the product of greed, a symptom of a humanity gone wrong, a humanity that lives to grasp and to get whatever, no matter the means. So before beginning the essence of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus prefaced his statement with these words, "I come not to abolish the law, I have come to fulfill it." Now, what did he mean by that? Now, some think that Jesus meant that he had come to be a law keeper, to show he could be obedient. He did that. He did show it. However, the word fulfill in the original describes a process, not an action. It means that Jesus, in his humanity, was the fulfillment of the law's intention. His life unfolded in a way that revealed what the Creator was saying through his law about being human. So Jesus' life demonstrates once and for all that there is a purpose to human life. We don't need to guess any longer about how we ought to live. We know what is right and what is wrong. Now, are we better people because we've been told that morality is private and determined by our culture? Is our society a better place to live in? And our children better off living in such a society that says that to them that there are no standards but themselves and their peers? Can we really say that this has made them better and given them the basis upon which they can build the kind of life that is worth living? Serious thinkers look at our bankrupt society and they're not convinced. Why should they? If we look at it, we discover that life is not a free-for-all. Man was not made to live like an animal in the jungle by instinct. Man was given rational and moral capacities to fulfill the purpose of Him who made him to live according to His will. There is a purpose in our creation. There are those who don't think so. There are those who think that we are an absurd mistake. But there is a purpose in our creation. Jesus tells us that. And we need to reaffirm this truth, that there is a purpose for the way we are to be. It is a purpose for the nature of our being. And so therefore, those commandments that God has given us, those commandments reveal the nature of humanity. They show what man was to be. And we Christians believe that this purpose is outlined by our Maker, first in the law given to Israel at Sinai, known as the Ten Commandments, and then in the most brilliant, most beautiful way, set forth in the life of Jesus Christ. The life of Jesus is an absolute. So we no longer need to live with the notion that there's no purpose to human life, that we don't know what is right and wrong. These words are in the book of Hebrews, chapter 1, verse 1 to 3. They go like this. In many and various ways God spoke of old to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days He has spoken to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things. Now notice, He spoke to the prophets in a number of ways, or to the fathers through the prophets in a number of ways and means. But when He came to the last days, He appointed His Son to speak to us. And what Hebrews means is that there's no more to say about being human. It has all been said in Jesus Christ. To know Him, to follow Him, leads to the best of life. It leads to that life eternal which begins now. It is ours for the asking and the believing. To grow to maturity unto the measure and the stature of Jesus Christ, who is true human life.
Thank you for joining us this half hour. We hope this edition of Encounter has brought you insight and inspiration. Tune in next week when Dr. Zamora will continue his series, The Shaping of American Society, with The Banishment of God. Until then, may God's joy be with you and your family. Remember, in Christ, life was meant to be lived to the fullest.